I feel that there's a genuine need and there's a purpose that I feel as a business we have something meaningful to contribute to society.
So hello and welcome. Today I'm very excited to be joined by Daniel Maggs from Bisu. Daniel, thank you very much for joining us today. I'd very much like to hear your story, your background, and what you're doing with Bisu and how it's going to really help change lots of lives. So perhaps first of all, could you give me an introduction about who you are and what you do? That'd be great.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much, Scott, for having me. So I'm a British entrepreneur based in Tokyo, running a startup that's helping people to understand and improve their health in the comfort of their own home. Originally, I was, for my sins, a lawyer many years ago. And I think it was great training. But during that time, I really got interested in the people who were making things and starting things and creating new things. And that challenge excited me. So I got my training and I left after 2 years. I went into a small investment bank, learning about tech companies. And then I moved to Japan. I had a passion for Japan for a long time. My degree was Japanese. And I joined a Japanese tech company as a product manager, doing sort of planning and marketing for new services. And during that time, we got into this whole area of Internet of Things and biosensing devices. They were just doing software. I wanted to do hardware, so I decided to leave, and the rest is history, as they say.
Excellent. So tell me a little bit more why you went this route. We'll talk more about Bisu in a minute, but with all of the different career paths you took, the interest in IoT and the interest in hardware, why focus on this? I think you're calling it biomarkers.
Yeah, I mean, it's a health sensing device, right? So the biomarkers are the indicators, the different indicators of health status that you can track with a device. But why do this kind of business? Why do this kind of product? I think there are a number of reasons. So there is a business side, which is, as a society, we have a pandemic of chronic disease. We also have an aging society. And it's really important for, without wanting to be sort of cheesy, better future for our children, change the world. It's also true that we need to live healthier, longer, more productive lives, for our society and for the economy as well, right? So it used to be the case that you would work in a job for, say, 60 years, you retire for 5, you have a small pension, and then you would go. That whole structure has changed now. We're retiring for a very, very long period of time. And actually, we need to work for longer. And many of us actually want to carry on working and creating our older age. So we know it's very important to go and see a doctor once a year. And when you get sick, of course, you can go and get treated. Your genetics also play a part. And the environment in which you grow up is also, financially, air quality, all these kind of things are very important. But the largest factor in whether or not you're sick or healthy is actually the day-to-day decisions you make about how you treat your body, how stressed you are, what you eat, what you drink, how much you exercise. Doesn't have to be a lot, but it has to be some. Your tobacco intake, your alcohol intake, all these things sum up. And none of us are 100% healthy and hopefully not 100% unhealthy. But the important thing is, overall, while enjoying life, you want to be in a healthy zone. And we're a company that helps people to be not perfect, but be in a healthy zone. So, there's a reason for the company that sort of comes more from, I think there's a business opportunity here, putting my businessman hat on. Living in Japan, a society that's quite closed in some ways, that's trying to be more open to the world, I thought, well, this is somewhere that we can make something that will be valuable, not just in Japan, but all over the world for a very, very long time. Like this trend of, health awareness and disease prevention and increasing longevity is not going away. It's not just a hobby for wealthy coastal dwellers in, who are into sort of biohacking and this kind of stuff, right? It's much more than that. And I think COVID has shown that there's a huge awareness now of this importance of proactively managing your health in a non-neurotic way. So I feel that there's a genuine need and there's a purpose that I feel as a business we have something meaningful to contribute to society. One of the things that excites me about Bisu is that traditionally you've had this whole area of medical devices and technology, and the people in this area are very focused on therapeutics. They're very concerned about treating patients and what's the condition and how do you get reimbursed. And then the people in the wellness space have been, well, sometimes, it's not necessarily personalized nutrition, but it's more personalized marketing or what feels good for you. And lots of sales and marketing, but not necessarily very robust. And I believe that we need to bring these two sides together because they have a lot to learn from each other. But I think one without the other is kind of incomplete. And, bringing more heart to this traditional medical industry, but bringing more scientific rigor to this slightly more touchy-feely, unregulated wellness area. So I feel this is really important to really bring transformational new services. We also like challenges. My co-founder Wojciech was a researcher in this area of technology called microfluidics or lab on chip for a very long time, a very experienced guy. And he wanted to take this technology out of the lab and into the home, into a real product. So it's very common you'll see on, news or articles, scientists develop, new chip that could test all these things and it's amazing, and they publish a paper and someone writes a few articles and the product never sees the light of day, because the reality is that the thing they made was small, but everything around it was huge, or like the cost was way too high or was way too complex. So, you need to also bring that kind of rigor, but also be very, very practical about what can people actually use, what's accessible, and so on. So this is the challenge that we face as a company. And the last point really is that the name Bisu actually has a meaning, which is originally it's a deity from Egypt who protects the family from evil and disease. He makes bad things go away and good things come in. He's like a protector. And he was slightly unusual because he was the only deity who, we're not religious by the way, but it's more symbolic. He didn't have a temple. He actually lived in people's homes. So he was close and trusted part of their lives. And he was the only Egyptian god who faced forwards, not sideways, right? So he was different from all the other ones. And why is this important? Because Bisu is a company that the ethos is to be the trusted friend, be the trusted advisor to not just the people who can afford the Oura rings and the glucose monitors, but ordinary people who want to take better care of themselves and their loved ones, but don't necessarily have the time or the desire or the means to go for all that deep testing, right? To make it accessible, but also reliable. And just to bring a new, refreshing approach to, I think, an area of testing and urinalysis. It's been the same for 70 years. The only innovation has been to make it scan a test strip with a smartphone. So we felt that we had the opportunity as kind of outsiders to bring something new. And that's really what Bisu is about.
That's really interesting. So, so many things to touch on there.
Sorry, that was a lot longer than the intro should have been.
No, I think that's it. Wrap up now. Great. No, there's so many things to dig into. So let's go back kind of to the start of this then. So the health pandemic, chronic disease health pandemic you mentioned. Give me if you can, some kind of idea of how big that pandemic is. What are you talking about here? So let me rephrase, say the question again then. So Yeah, we were talking. You were talking there about kind of the size, the pandemic, the chronic medical conditions that we're looking at. What would be really good is to understand kind of the scale of this. You know, what kind of numbers are we talking about, and what conditions are you looking at as well?
Sure. So on the more extreme side, you have full-blown conditions like diabetes, chronic kidney disease. Those are the two main chronic conditions, and obviously cardiovascular disease as well. Things that affect risk of stroke and so on. And that's obviously a very large problem. In the US, for example, 1 in 3 people is either diabetic or pre-diabetic. And many of them who have those conditions have complications as well.
Mm.
But, you know, many people listening, of course, will not have those conditions in their lifetime. But there are a number of things that will affect them. So we know, for example, that our kidney condition declines naturally with age over time, and that by age typically 65, 70, most people are at the stage slightly before chronic kidney disease. So they don't die of it. The point being is that the longer we actually live, the, how can I say, the condition in which your motor is going to be more and more of a factor in your quality of life in your older years. And eventually things start to break down. So one of the factors for that can be a diet that's, overly high in things like carbohydrates and protein, and not high enough in things like fruit and vegetables. Another factor can be overly high blood pressure. Most people have quite a lot of salt in their diet, and that's very important for your body. But having enough potassium is also really important to balance out the salt. That's one key factor in blood pressure, for example, which is obviously a key factor in health. So what we're looking at is not just trying to prevent diabetes. That's an endpoint. That's part of a bigger trend. But it's more like giving people a way to check in with their body periodically to stay on the right side of the line overall while still enjoying the things that they like. It's not about perfection. It's about progress.
Yeah, interesting. And I've heard this a couple of times now. I did an interview with a company in New York that's looking at making the continuous glucose monitors more accessible.
Yeah, Josh is great.
Yeah. So the whole idea of that is to be able to understand how your body reacts to certain things so you can adjust and improve rather than necessarily just cut out completely, because cutting out and adding is really difficult. But gradual improvement is a good thing, I think. So it seems like you're looking at these massive issues, diabetes, cardiac conditions as well. What about daily improvements? If people are using your product, and we'll talk about how it works in a minute, if they're using your product, is it something that they can start to see daily improvements?
Yeah, so the things that you're testing, the biomarkers do change from day to day. You don't have to test every single day. So just to be clear, it's a device that tests two things, urine and saliva. And it can test different things on different test sticks, depending on the need, whether it's a nutrition test or a pet health test or a baby health test or a saliva oral health test. But let's just focus on the nutrition side. So the things that we test to give a sample are, for example, sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, hydration, pH, vitamin C. So these have a number of obviously effects on the body. So sodium, for example, is very important for things like blood sugar control. Potassium is very important for blood pressure regulation. Calcium is very important for muscle and nerve function, not just bones, for example. Magnesium is very important for creating energy. It also helps your muscles to relax. It's good for promoting sleep, for example. Vitamin C is a very important antioxidant. Hydration has effects not just on things like hunger, but also mood and cognition, concentration, and so on.
Yeah.
So way before the disease stage. But a key point is that what people are actually trying to aim for, their target level, is actually very different based on who they are. So if, for example, you are an athlete, you're sweating a lot if you're training hard regularly. So your target sodium consumption is going to be significantly higher than someone who's a bit older and may have some kidney or blood pressure issues. If, for example, you're on a keto diet, your sodium requirements will be even higher because your glucose level is very low, which means your body doesn't hold on to salt in the same way. It loses it much more easily. So when we look at recommendations, we think about, yes, there's a test result, that's very important, but context is very important. Who are you? Your age, sex, weight, how physically active you like to be, what are your diet preferences, also your allergies, for example. And by taking these into account, we want to provide a recommendation that someone can practically act on, but most importantly is actually based on what people already do. So, the more you ask someone to kind of move away from the existing habits, the more resistance you have. And I think the beauty is to understand, okay, how do you actually like to eat? Now let's do it better. But we're not asking you to fundamentally change it. So we say it's your way, but better. So one of the things that we've been doing is working on using some third-party software for easy food tracking to understand how the person likes to eat, and then say, okay, well, here's your eating patterns, here are test results. These are the specific changes we recommend based on your preferred eating style to get you into a better zone. And we think that's much more realistic than saying, here's a beautiful like kale and chia seed meal, looks great on Instagram, but you're not actually going to make it. And that's where the feedback loop basically breaks down. So that's kind of the approach.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. Can we talk about the lab on a chip? So,
Sure.
About the technology. Tell me more about how that came to be, and some of the kind of innovations that happened along the way there to make that something that we can use in the home.
Of course. So the product itself is called a home health lab. That's the new category of device that we're bringing here. The technology is called Microfluidics, literally small. I mean, I'm not the CTO, so Wojciech will probably kill me if I get this wrong. But
We'll see that on
basically,
camera.
imagine a microchip in a computer, and inside electricity is flowing, and it's being manipulated to perform certain calculations or instructions. So a microfluidic chip is a little bit like this in the sense that something is flowing inside the chip and it's being manipulated to cause something to happen. But what is flowing is not electricity. It's a sample of some kind. Could be blood. In our case, it's urine and saliva. A lot easier to work with. Look at Theranos. Chemical reactions are being performed. So you're combining that sample with a set of reagents, and then you're observing what happens in that reaction. So this lab-on-chip technology enables you to miniaturize and automate chemical reactions. And because it happens in a very small scale, you can use very small amounts of sample. I believe it's called the surface to area ratio, but the dynamics or the physics of the channels mean that reactions can also happen in a faster or more efficient way. So it's way easier, much easier, sorry, to do this with urine and saliva because it doesn't require preparation or centrifuging or have volume limitations in the same way that a blood sample does, and it's readily available. So that's why it's possible to, in our case, test 11 things simultaneously from less than a milliliter of sample collected while you're urinating. So the device has a test stick. I'll grab one here, 1 second. Just one of the ones over there. The normal one, into the casing, sorry. Just the one sitting in the box. Yes, amazing.
And
okay,
the
sorry.
new pile, not the used pile.
No, this is not used. So normally it's flat, it's popped to a triangle shape, and it's extended. So you have a sample collection pad on the end of the test stick, and this is submerged very briefly in the sample, closed, and then placed on the reader. I really should have this in front of me, my apologies. What it means is, a normal urine test, you would do one of two things: pee into a cup and dip your strip, or pee directly on the strip. Neither of these are very appealing. They're doable, but one of the problems is that the urine test strip, and just to be clear, we are not using urine test strips. It's a microfluidic chip. A urine test strip is a piece of paper, a plastic with paper pads on top, and these react when they come into contact with the sample and they change color. And this is measured in a very basic way that tells a doctor, okay, I might want to do some follow-up tests. But if you're in a home setting with an unskilled, an ordinary person who, is busy, got other things to do, places to go, it's very easy to mess this up. And you're getting a very, very rough or often inaccurate measurement of concentration. So our competitors offer these test strips to scan with a smartphone to try and provide you with lifestyle advice. Our aim is to take this to the next level. And because you have these test strips, you can only use tests that can be immobilized or dried on paper pads. So that limits the things you can test. So we have one of our competitors trying to, well, they've developed some prototype new tests, but the problem is the accuracy is very, very low because they're limited by the use of this paper medium and the smartphone camera measurement. So in summary, the lab on chip or microfluidics is tiny amount of sample, the ability to test chemistries that are not based on paper, gels, films, dried reagents, the ability to use new measurement methods. So we don't use the classic measurement method you use with a smartphone. We use a different one. It's a form of something called spectrometry. You eliminate any timing issues because the device has perfect control over the reaction timing and it sees the whole thing in real time. And the data goes to your phone by Bluetooth. What it means is, technology aside, you can really relax. You can collect a tiny amount of sample, no cups, no cleanup, no worrying about, okay, I have to get my phone out and open an app and start the timer and wait 2 minutes to take, none of that is gone. Put the stick on the reader, wash your hands, go to the kitchen, fix up a coffee, open your phone, and there are the results. It makes it much easier to have this as a regular part of your life. It changes it from a patient experience to a person experience.
No, I like that. Yeah. So you mentioned the data as part of the kind of analysis. Also earlier on, we talked about regulation. Now there's been quite a lot of talk in some of the other conversations I've had about how if you look at the kind of legacy traditional medical arena, you have a very high degree of regulation and control around medical devices, around intended use and this kind of thing. And if you speak to physicians and doctors and people involved in that kind of legacy traditional side, there's a worry that all of these startups coming in with med tech and health tech, they come in with this expectation of how they're going to change things, but with no real understanding of kind of the regulatory framework in which they need to operate to be considered, part of the community, if you like. And that can create risk, maybe, and risk of abuse, risk of misuse. So particularly when you're looking at very personal data about someone's health, about in which you could perhaps kind of project from as well in the future as well. What do you think about this, about the regulation in the medical market and your role in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's regulation on two sides. One is the FDA regulation, which is about, are you infringing medical device rules? But there's another very important regulation, which is FTC, which is, are you deceiving consumers? And I think in the wellness space, it's quite rare for startups to breach the FDA regulations. It happens occasionally. I can give a few examples. Typically, people are claiming to test something. We have one competitor we have two main competitors. One of them, they claimed falsely to detect immune system strength based on an infection test. One, you can't do it. It's literally impossible. But two, you're trying to repurpose an infection test that's originally FDA required, which is like a disease check. So you're skating on very fine ice on both the FDA side and also the FTC side. I think on the wellness side, though, in general, sorry for the shameless bashing, I haven't named names, so that's my get out of jail free card. I think really the issue on the wellness side normally though is FTC because there are a lot of there are quite a lot of startups where you're making claims that aren't really justified. I mean, the one I gave is a more extreme version, but unless these things are really howlers, then normally the regulatory authorities don't take action. And it's tricky because people obviously are interested in technology, and there's a subsegment of us who are really keen to see the latest and the greatest. But I think people don't buy because it has a great technology. They generally buy because it makes them feel a certain way. However, what we've noticed in the wellness space is that there are some startups, I'm terrible, who have very strong sales and marketing, and that's something we're working very much on bringing up, new site coming up and so on. But they have very strong launch. They typically get to a Series A, do lots of pre-orders, some sales, and then the reviews start to catch up with them because they can't actually do what they said they were doing. So there's one startup, for example, that has a breath analyzer that claims to tell people if they are burning fats or carbohydrates. Again, no names basis. But the problem, the huge omission that's not mentioned on the website is that to do this, you have to measure two things, CO2 and oxygen in the breath. And it's an established ratio called the respiratory exchange ratio. They measure one of those things, CO2 only, and they estimate the oxygen. So you imagine different people's lung capacity, the way they breathe and stuff. Like, there's no peer review paper. It's a cherry-picked selection of non-peer review papers. It's pretty crappy, but they managed to get to an $18 million Series A, so hot startup, right? But I personally think Levels are going to beat the crap out of them, because what I see with Levels is that they're being very careful to not promise anything they can't do, starting a more exploratory basis, gather the data, do the peer review studies, and then go to those next stages. So I have a lot of respect for what they're doing. I'm not a user yet, hoping to be soon, but Bisu's approach is the same in the sense that we're starting on the wellness side. We're starting with a proper peer-reviewed external validation of accuracy, followed by, and this is really the key point, is most of the recommendations you see in the wellness industry are all black box. So it's personalized recommendation, personalized for you. So, okay, why is this important? For two reasons. One is, on a scientific basis, you want to know that the test result or the recommendation is relevant to their body. But the second aspect is people do not like to be told what to do. They like the idea that they are choosing to do something. They are not being told what to do. This is basic psychology, right? So there's a startup called Noom. I can say this because there's a class action lawsuit, who's one of the hot startups in the weight loss space. They've been around for quite a few years now. And they have this super long funnel on their website, which is basically, get your personalized plan, and it's 80% off and all this stuff. And they got hit with a $100 million lawsuit about 3-4 months ago, because it turned out that the only thing that was really personalized was the onboarding flow. It was a personalized marketing, but actually what you were getting in the end was not much different from anyone else. Sold a ton of products off the back of that, right? But I guess this is, maybe you could say it's the technologist in us, maybe it's the Puritan, but in the short term, maybe this means you make less money, but I think we couldn't live with ourselves if we went down that road. So what I really want to see is, more rigor in the air. And I guess what this case study shows is that, yes, these things can catch up with you, even in the wellness space, even if you're not doing anything related to patients. Lots of unhappy customers. On the medical device side, I think people who are going to the medical device side kind of know what they're letting themselves in for. If there's a predicate device, then it's pretty straightforward. For us, it's most likely that this will be, not certain yet, we're doing like it's called a pre-submission, like a consultation. It's most likely this will be what's called a de novo device, which means there is no predicate device. Like, if there is a Siemens urine test strip analyzer, and now I release the Bisu urine test strip analyzer, I can say, okay, it's basically the same, but kind of better. So we don't need to get any formal approval. We'll just file this form, right? And now we can sell it. That's what normally happens. But in our case, the measurement method is different. The biomarkers in some cases are new. They haven't been tested at home before. The sample collection experience is new. So no predicate device, you have to apply. That creates a barrier, right? So I think probably for us, the challenge in this area has been, the real challenge for Bisu has been that the people on the med tech side are generally like very interested in therapeutics and patients. And there's a lot of deep tech often. And the wellness side, lots of great investors, but a lot of them just really want to see a big business fast. They see technology, oh, it's just a means to an end. It just has to be good enough. And sales and marketing and executions are really important things. Like, yes, but your technology and your data and your validation is actually part of your execution. If you don't get it right, you will mess up, a few years down the road, as we've seen. So the struggle for us is that we are neither a classic consumer hardware startup. I mean, I'm very fond of Levels, but I envy them because they get to use an off-the-shelf sensor. We have to build one from scratch, right? But we are neither a med tech startup. We're actually somewhere in the middle, and that made it really hard in the early days to raise money. Partly I had to improve my pitch, but because we didn't fit into a box. And that was something that, we had a few near misses along the way and thankfully come to a much better place. But that was really the struggle. But we believe that we have the chance to really bring these two sides together. I think as what Levels is doing for glucose monitoring, Bisu is doing for urine and saliva.
Oh, fascinating. So looking forward over the next 2 to 5 years, what's the kind of impact that you're aiming to have? And in order to get that, what do you think needs to change, if anything, to help you get there?
Yeah, this is a really good question because a number of things come to mind. So obviously it depends what market you're talking about, right? So I think in Japan, where I live, there's a very accessible healthcare system and the cost of treatment is a lot lower. The upside is that people in general are more healthy. It's a more health conscious culture. The downside is they're also more passive about their health, right? On the US side, there's a culture of a lot more, being proactive, manage your health, but also an extreme opposite of like, you're letting things go by the wayside. If I was looking at a market like the US, I strongly believe there's a need for a product, but I also believe people probably also need much more affordable healthcare and health insurance. Like if I had to choose between Bisu and that, I would say the latter is the elephant in the room. But I don't get political, but just my personal opinion about that. But as far as Bisu is concerned, the impact is that firstly, we should build an experience that is incredibly easy and pleasurable in the sense of being that people should feel good about themselves when they use this product. So again, if you look at Levels, for example, one of the very simple thing, but a genius idea was to put this sticker on the CGM and it brands it. Now you're sporty. Now you're part of the tribe and it becomes an advertising device. Brilliant idea. For us, our approach is to make a urine tester beautiful, like to make it not like a strip, to make the process elegant, to make it look like even the reader doesn't look like a testing device. It's very discreet, to remove those associations. And then the test experience itself should be engaging and having data, but also conversational. So we haven't released it yet, but the new design is much more like it's much more like a social media timeline. That's the limit I'll say for now. But we want to take people on a journey and give them reasons to use the product, even when they're not doing tests. This is really the key point. How do you get someone to engage when they're not doing a test? Because in a CGM case, you're paying Levels. I mean, it's called price skimming. You start at the highest segment and the price comes down. But, typically people are going on for 1 to 3 months, and that's kind of it, right? So we see this in a lot of consumer startups. There's a big drop off. But services like Facebook, for example, other ones, people use it all the time, right? It's a regular part of their life. They couldn't imagine life without it. So maybe I'm delusional, who knows? But my mission is to make an experience that people couldn't imagine not using, that it will be a part of their self-care routine rather than I'm going to pay to go on some 3 months program. And that's also about having an affordable price. I want this to be not cheap, but I don't want us to feel that we're charging people more because we can get away with it. I want people to feel really happy about paying the price, but for us to make a profit. That's really what I want to get to. So In 5 years' time, we'll have a selection of test sticks. There'll be the nutrition test. We've got a test for cats and dogs, see how your animal's doing. A baby diaper with an embedded removable test stick, see how baby's doing. Saliva test for oral health. We'd also like to have a saliva cortisol test. It's a stress marker. Funnily enough, we also have interest in testing cows from quite a few areas, like livestock testing. And we also have some interest in having some kind of toilet integration at some point. So when we started this company, we were actually trying to put something in the toilet. And this whole dream of the health tracking toilet's been around for almost 20 years. I'll give you a short history. The first people to talk about this were Panasonic. Then it was Manchester Electric. But they said, one day we will track the health from the toilet, and Panasonic is going to build this toilet. And they tried, and it didn't work out. And to be fair, they were quite early. And then Toto, everyone knows Toto, 2008, they actually made a toilet that did this. It measured glucose from your urine. 2 years later, they shut the whole thing down. Why? Firstly, the technology area, this lab on chip technology area, was less mature than it is now. Secondly, the approach they made to the technology was something that is really easy to break down and degrade. So if you do anything in the toilet, huge cleanliness issues, are your sensors stable? Do they have to be refrigerated? Do they have to be calibrated? The more complex technology you put into the product, the harder it gets. But it's hard to make it simple. So the challenge is make it work, make it accurate, make it easy to use, but make it simple. I've seen people making like behemoths of a toilet with like kitchen sink of sensors. Is never going to be a product, right? So every month almost, I see an article, you know, someone announces a toilet device concept and so on. But this really comes back to the point, which is technology is great, but you mustn't fall in love. The true innovation is, we believe, is sincerely important. Technology is not just a means to an end. It's a fundamental tool by which we advance, you know, say advance humanity, but advance the human experience forward, right? So it's very important. But the user experience is also critical. And once you get too in love with technology, then you start to fail. So this is a very long way of saying that we do have plans to have a toilet-based device, but I think it will not be what you would normally expect. We're basically looking to embed the reader so that you can take your sample with a test stick and then just have it right in the toilet, test it right then and there. Because once you start having an arm and you want to collect the sample, like ladies are wonderful, but they don't always pee in the same direction. They can't, it's hard to control, right? So if you're having an arm in the toilet that's trying to collect that sample, it's going to have to move very fast to make it work. And then you have to clean it afterwards. Or if you're collecting it from the toilet bowl, bacteria, all these things build up. So I think the best solutions are always elegantly simple, but there's a lot of work to get to that point.
Okay, interesting. Now, this has been fascinating.
More than you bargained for, sorry.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, absolutely. But that's good. That's good because I like to learn and I like to find out new things. So that's brilliant. Now, last question, I think, is you were describing earlier on about the deity Bisu, which I find fascinating. And having worked in organizations with a Japanese influence before, I wasn't surprised to find that the name had a meaning. Yes. All of these other organizations that have had a Japanese influence, the name has been incredibly important and has got some deep meaning behind it. So how did you find that name? How did you find the deity? Was it something that was already there and it's like, oh, we can use this? Or did you actually go and look for something?
I'd like to say there's a glamorous story behind it, but we were basically searching on Google. So we were brainstorming ideas. I think, you know, like I said, I don't think it's the fact that it happens to be an ancient deity that's important, but the character of Bisu, I think, represents in many ways what we are trying to achieve as a company. It's not the reason to start the company, but I think it helps to represent some of those reasons. And I think, you know, when you see lots of companies in the health and wellness space, often the first name is slightly, doesn't really have so much of it may have a kind of meaning, but it's typically something health, right? Something health. And, you know, we didn't want to be kind of pigeonholed as like a health tech startup. we want it to be a brand that's really familiar to people and simple. So right now the website's bisu.bio. It's now changing to com soon. Because we don't want to be seen as like a biotech startup. We kind of started in that area, but I think it should be snappy and simple. So, but ideally you would have a name, there are names that do convey the benefit. Ideally it conveys both the product and the benefit. That's the ideal, right? So Levels is a pretty cool name because, it's like trying to get to the next level, but also track your level or something, right? But I think, when we saw it, we kind of fell in love with it, and the rest is history, really. So that's basically it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, your insights, and talking with me. At the end of these interviews, I normally ask my guests one last question, which is quite simply: is there anything that you wish I'd asked you that I haven't asked you, and you'd like to share with us? It's okay to say no.
I mean, you've been a great host, so nothing I feel you haven't said, but what I would say to the audience is, if you are someone who's interested in testing the product, do please go to our website at www.bisu.bio. That's bisu.bio. There's a form where you can sign up for the beta program, which we're rolling out through this year. If you have any questions, or if you're interested in things like partnerships or press, whatever it is, or just curious about the product, feel free to get in touch. We'd be very happy to speak to you. And thank you for listening to me.
By now, those links will be across the bottom already, as if by magic. So please follow those. Also, to the viewers, if you like this, please don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's plenty of other interesting interviews coming along as well. And if you're okay with this, Daniel, I'll put the link to the Levels interview as well, because you mentioned it so many times as well. So Absolutely. Once again, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Scott.